Hi, YouTube. Welcome again. Congratulations to all the students on your results. What we're gonna do now is take you through a history lesson, a short history lesson from like 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022 coming up. So we'll be talking about some of the problems that happened in CXC over the last 5 years, 6 years. We'll be looking at what we're seeing with this current exam and what any redress we have seen with some of the issues. I'm privileged to have with me here all the way from Barbados, Miss Paula-Anne Moore, and she has been one of the key voices in Barbados, in the region actually, on stemming from the massive issue. And if you look at my channel around 2020 and you just type up CXC fiasco, you would see some of the issues that popped up there. So if you just go on my channel and CXC fiasco and check anything around 2020, the whole region, parents and students involved in the examination were in an uproar. So the thing with it happens in Trinidad. I don't know if it happens in Barbados, but sometimes memory is short and people forget the things. We forget how frustrated, how terrible it was, how much students were in tears after that issue in 2020. So without any further talk, I'll ask you to introduce yourself and maybe tell us a little bit about how you started your advocacy.
Good morning, Kerwin. Good morning, Student Hub. Good morning, Trinidad and Tobago and the region. It is a privilege and an honor to be part of this initiative. I want to thank you for giving me your platform to continue to ventilate issues. Just to set the table and to put everything in context, I am a proud CARICOM national. I am a proud beneficiary of top-notch regional education. At the risk of dating myself, I was one of the first CXC candidates back when dinosaurs roamed the earth. And it has stood me in good stead. I've performed quite well academically and professionally based on that foundation. So any of my initiatives over, I think this might be the 7th academic year we've been advocating on behalf of parents and students. It's from a place of love of the Caribbean and constructive criticism and wanting our children to be the beneficiaries of global standard best practice, which they're entitled to and which they deserve. So having set that table, let me say that the 2020 CXC grading fiasco, which are not my words, they're the words of one of the teacher union presidents in Barbados, that was indicative of systemic challenges when it came to CXC's grading and internal culture and working. Those of us that were neck deep in it remember vividly the callousness and the initial dismissiveness, which was the response to, I think cumulatively, it was like 50,000 students and teachers and parents that were signatories to the petitions that circulated.
How much? How many students?
Speaking from memory, and there were a number of different petitions, but I think one was 20,000. It hit about 50,000 cumulatively. Wow. Speaking again from memory, it was 20,000 children that put in for reviews, which was, I think, 1,000. At one point, it was 1,000% increase in the normal reviews. So that's indicative that there was something very wrong. And we all know well that most of those reviews, I think it was 97%, the grades were unchanged. Our children are resilient. They have moved on. Well, they were forced to move on. But they will not forget. And certainly we parents, as a parent, there's nothing that we would die for our children, the vast
So
majority of.
you had a student, a son involved during the 2020 year.
Yes. And as you know, we parents, unless you're in the education system, you don't really pay attention to details until you are directly affected. And it was an eye-opener, obviously, initially when my son was disadvantaged. His peers, when we investigated further, we found that it was not just the school, it wasn't just Barbados, it was a regional challenge. And we sounded the alarm. We mobilized. Finally, CARICOM listened. Finally, CXC had a review, internal review team. They issued a comprehensive report, which is on CXC's website, which I would invite people to review. We have to ask ourselves what happened to the recommendations that were detailed on that report from 2020 till now.
So we have 100 people viewing live right now, and many more people will view this after the live. But if you weren't around in 2020 during the exam year, you probably wondering what is this great injustice that happened in 2020? Do you care to elaborate on this? And before you do, I'm glad you set the tone of you being a proud CARICOM member. And this is not because the reason I'm saying that is because people wonder why is Kerwin Springer always saying these things about CXC so publicly? Because after being online for a while and experiencing what I've experienced and hearing from so many students across the region, it gives me a kind of bird eye view, and I'm realizing that this CXC is on a level of like FIFA, I would say, on a level of like FIFA in terms of the entrenched injustice and I would say corrupt practices that they are able to fly with. Anyhow, can you give us a little description about the 2020?
Yes. Well, in a nutshell, as you can recall well, because of the effect of COVID on education, CSEC came up with a modified approach for the exam, in that they dropped the paper 2, the long paper, and graded based on paper 1, the multiple choice, and the SBA. And one would have expected logically that the paper 1, which is relatively easier since it's multiple choice, and CXC in their wisdom does not increase the bank of questions. So basically, if a child can access the questions and study, and in some cases memorize, a lot of children are able to do quite well with the paper 1. So
that's common knowledge, is that?
Indeed. So I only say that to say one would have expected then that children that were high academic performers would have been able to do the exams in their sleep. And what happened, and again, I am not an education professional, so I went to the experts, 2 experts, one a statistician, a professor in UCL in England, in London, and one a Harvard educated testing professional in the US. And they advise that there is a concept of grade compression, whereby if an exam is easier than standard, what happens is that those high academic performing students tend not to do as well. And then those children who may not be as high academic performing, they do better. So what happened in 2020, which CXC promoted happily, is that the average grade increased. But of course, statistics can be used and misused. Yes. When you drill down into the specifics, students and schools that normally performed very well had a much lower result. And clearly their grading scheme was flawed, which CXC to this day, though I noticed that Dr. Wesley made a reference yesterday to systems not being up to mark, and that was revealed during COVID, which I thought was a very interesting comment that he made yesterday. But anyway, I'll stick a pin in that.
I missed that comment.
I will research and send it to you. I thought that was a very, very telling comment. But anyway, there was quite a crisis with the grades. You had children. I think one of them was the #1 math student in all of Trinidad that had represented Trinidad at Math Olympiads in Moscow. And this was a student that normally gets grade 1s, and he ended up with, I think it was 4s and 5s at Cape. I mean, like ludicrous results.
Right.
You had in the regional merit list 100 students tying for first place. I mean, nonsensical results.
Right.
So anyway, constructively, we advocated for our students. Eventually, CXC changed their tone of dismissiveness and did have a review team that reviewed the marks and CXC's grading. They did actually recognize that there was a challenge with the grading. They came up with recommendations, one of which was improved damage control and communications with CXC's so-called valued education stakeholders, students, parents, and teachers. And here we are 5 calendar years later. And annually thereafter, we've had some significant flaws in the administration of exams. We may recall in 2021, CXC, in their wisdom, decided to have the exams the same year, the same timing as if COVID never happened. And we advocated for a year in advance, and literally after Jamaica's minister coming out publicly, and you know the ministers usually don't come out publicly.
Right. Yes.
The Jamaica minister came out publicly, and literally a few days before the exams were set to happen, they decided to delay the exams for 3 weeks. I mean, how embarrassing is that? Right. We've had issues with flawed exams. We'll get to 2024 and the Cape Unit 2 chemistry exam that the master teachers wrote to CXC and their relevant ministries saying this paper is flawed, and the response back from CXC reviewing themselves here. I don't know how that's best practice. They said, y'all didn't know what we're talking about, as we would say in Barbados, which to me is a grave insult to the teachers. Our exam is fine. There were 20,000 people that signed a petition this year relating to maths, CSEC.
Right.
I don't even think CXC had the courtesy of a response to that. And we've got a 36% pass rate for CSEC Maths this year. Right. I would say 2 things just to conclude. They are grave challenges that need to be redressed as it relates to CXC's governance, as it relates to CXC's regulation. If you compare what happens with other examining bodies, for example, Cambridge, the UK has a regulatory body called Ofqual, which is independent of government, independent of the exam bodies. They review and regulate the exam bodies. Somehow we have determined that it's a good idea for CXC essentially to regulate itself. And I also want to say that in this review and in this advocacy journey that I've had for these past many years, I don't want to call it blame, as someone said. I wouldn't call it bashing our own. As far as I'm concerned, I'm proud of our homegrown entity, but we have to hold them to the same standards that we expect from any other entity if we want to thrive in this 21st century global village. I think we have to look at CARICOM and CARICOM's role, our government's role in advocating and representing their constituents, and they have fallen short of the mark of expectations.
So I just want to touch back on 2020 because I mean me personally, I was in consternation about certain things, that exact same use of the paper one and the eradication of the paper too. I mean that blew my mind. And before what happened what happened. I said this was going to happen from a mathematical point of view. We'll have students who can just memorize up to 60 questions and they will do well. And then we'll have students who they just approach maths from they are brilliant students. They guaranteed to get a 1 in a traditional setting, but they don't memorize off multiple choice. So they may lose 2 or 3 marks, but because of that, because the what do we call it again? The curve was so tight. If you lost like 4 marks in that multiple choice, you get a 2. If you lost like 5, 6 marks, you end up with a 3. Because paper 2 wasn't there to make a nice wide curve. So we had students who knew they are brilliant in maths ending up with 3s and 4s, and CXC would compare. They also have history of all the different schools and what grades this school normally gives. So they can see that things are just not lined up well. But my thing is, I know you were involved or at least informed with the legal approach to this problem in 2020. And one of the things that people always ask me, can you sue CXC? That time around 2020, there was so many remarking and queries, and out of these queries, some of the queries were school-wide. Out of these queries, we saw different schools, different teachers made some queries, and they were able to get back some change. And just the sheer amount of queries that there were, and the amount of changing, and even on a yearly basis, how can someone query something, got a 3, query it, and it switches to a 1, and no one bats an eye about that? Isn't that isn't that ridiculous? And if that happens at a large scale, so can you tell me a bit about like the legal battle and like what is CXC and why are they so above the law and there's no redress as far as that is concerned?
One thing before I go on, I just want to quickly say it wasn't just the grading. There's something called, I'm not going to pronounce it right, and so-called education leaders laughed at me as if because you're a parent, you don't have a right to advocate for your children. There's something called weighting or scaling. I think it's pronounced the Hieronymus scaling. That is almost obsolete. And in their wisdom, while they were devising the grading, that's what CXC used. And the experts have told me that is one of the major reasons why the grading results came back so flawed. There was also the SBA issue where CXC threw the teachers under the bus. And there was an accusation of, how does one put it, delicately, that some teachers may not have been appropriate in how they assessed the students in their SBAs. Also, the SBAs being uploaded up to last year, there was a great issue in Barbados where the SBAs were sent to CXC, or there was some issue between the SBAs being collated, sent to the ministries, and then sent on to CXC. And because of that, a lot of children got ungraded. And even when the grades were so-called corrected, they were not a reflection of what those students and teachers know the child made. So there's so many issues in the education ecosystem, as CXC likes to say. It's not necessarily 100% in CXC's domain, but somebody has to take responsibility, and that is what you're not seeing. When it comes to the legal justice, I don't understand. Of course, the lawyers have told me, well, it's the norm in international jurisprudence that entities that have an international or diplomatic status, they're immune from legal accountability. We have to ask ourselves, why is it that in the Caribbean in the 21st century, there is this imperative to protect the entities that were set up supposedly to serve CARICOM nationals, to protect them from accountability to the CARICOM nationals. In Trinidad and in Barbados, they were either individual parents or groups of parents. In Barbados, we were blessed enough that we had 2 major law practices that pro bono took the initiative to represent these children in the law courts. Barbados was unique in that we were probably the only CARICOM jurisdiction where there was a facility that CXC was not immune from legal accountability, so the lawyers tell us, but the law courts ruled differently. For some reason, the Barbados government, I am told, put a certificate of immunity in place after the lawsuit was filed. In Trinidad, because of a loophole, their lawsuit was unsuccessful. But again, even if there is a need for some form of diplomatic immunity, why is it that the environment in the Caribbean does not provide for any other mean of accountability that CXC has, or even our ministries
there
have?
was diplomatic immunity, so you can't take CXC to task as far as a lawsuit is concerned.
In many of the jurisdictions, it's explicitly stated. Trinidad is unique. Well, not unique. It's one of the few jurisdictions that has FOIA, Freedom of Information Act. And that was the premise under which the lawsuits were rendered in Trinidad. That
so you can ask CXC to see your transcript.
Well, except it then turned out, and there was in the lower court they were successful, but it was overturned in appeal because, and again speaking from memory, and I'm not a lawyer, neither do I play one on TV, but I gather because the agreement between CXC and the ministry in Trinidad does not provide for CXC providing the scripts for CAPE and CSEC. Because of that, the Court of Appeal overturned the verdict in the lower court. Apparently for SIA, you can get the scripts, but that's a separate and distinct agreement from that relating to CAPE and CSEC. But the Court of Appeal chastised the Ministry in Trinidad and Tobago because they took so long, excuse me, in responding to the request for the scripts that CXC went and destroyed the scripts. Right. So, I mean, it almost seems as though
time passed enough. They dragged the time enough so that
yes, exactly. And you got to ask yourself, was that by design? And why is it that our ministries seem to, I can only conclude based 5 years later that it seems as though the ministries are more interested in almost putting a circle of protection around CXC to protect them from accountability. And who pays the price? Our children and the teachers and the parents that work so hard for these children to excel.
My thing is, any examination body in 2024, I mean, there were some challenges logistically from, let's say, the time when you wrote CXC, and you said you were one of the first batches in CXC. But now, I believe with all the technology we have now, there should be strong, students should be able to see their marks, they should be able to know the grade boundary, at least. Even if you don't want to give them exam scripts, because that could be a little problematic, but students should be able to see their marks, just like how we have it in SEA in Trinidad. You should be able to see your raw scores and your weighted scores and know what you achieved to get the grade boundary. I find it almost hilarious that you write an exam, you send it wherever, it goes wherever, it marks by a whole set of different people. The average person writing CXC has no idea how anything works. And then you get back a grade, and that's it, you get back a grade 1, 2, 3. So we have students who feel like, you know, I really think I should get a grade 1. Mm-hmm. And then they send a query, and lo and behold, they really switch it over to a grade 1. I just find that whole process just, I cannot accept that. The math teacher in me just cannot accept that.
But you're lucky that that even happens, because my experience is that is by far the small exception to the rule. One of the other things that I also want to share with your audience is one of the things that I take away as a lasting legacy with some pride is that we advocated in 2020 directly to the independent review team that was looking at the grading fiasco, and it is documented, our advocacy in the report. And one of the things, we were the only parent group that did so, or public group that did so. And one of the things we advocated for is that it was unconscionable and the height of unfairness that back up to that point, you risked having a diminution of your grade if you sent in a review, which obviously then is a disincentive for people to request a review. And that was something that was relatively recent that CXC implemented, I think, in 2017, or anyway, around that time. When I advocated directly to the IRT membership, they were shocked. That is outside the norm. And one of the things that they recommended, which CXC acceded to, is that your review, at the minimum, you end up after the review process with the grade that you are challenging. You don't get a lower grade. And that is something that I am proud of, that obviously has ramifications.
Yeah, that's good. That's really good.
To all of the students.
That's really good. Another issue that comes up is, okay, so we are aware that Dr. Wayne Wesley is the chief registrar of CXC. And when there's time for policy change, when there's time to deliver the speech like yesterday, when there's time to do any positive or media presentation, he is there. Mm-hmm. But when we had the issue in 2020 and other minor issues that pop up throughout the years, it's always pointed up, sideways, and then when there's never someone held accountable. So it's if in Trinidad something is going wrong, we blame the Prime Minister. At least we have some figure to blame. We blame the Prime Minister, opposition leader. We have figures who are in charge. So is he in charge of CXC? Who is in charge of CXC? Where does the buck finally stop where CXC is concerned?
Well, when you figure that out, let me know. Again, I've been neck deep in this advocacy for 5 calendar years. And when I investigate, and others I investigate the governance of CXC, and as I said earlier on, the heart of this issue, I'm a corporate governance professional as well. It relates to the governance, the accountability. There is a CXC council. And if you look at the council, it's about 20-something, 30-something members, because it's all the CARICOM entities. And then within each entity, there are a number of representatives per entity. You have the chairman, who is Sir Hilary. Sir Hilary, I believe back in 2020 and subsequently.
From the University of the West Indies.
Pardon?
He's from the University of the West Indies.
Yes, he's also the, I might not be saying the right term, but say effectively the head of UE. And again, you might ask yourself, if he has so much on his plate with CXC alone, you ask yourselves, to what extent how does the council work? Because obviously that's a very wieldy body to be making the executive decisions. And I was going on to say, Sir Hilary went to great points to say that any decisions that CXC makes at the macro level, they are approved by the COSOD, the CARICOM Ministers of Education. But then you would look, COSOD, I have seen made pronouncements that CXC is responsible for some of the major pillars of CXC's performance. So again, it seems to be a circular issue when it relates to accountability. And I put it to the public, how long are we going to accept this status quo? Look at the results that were released yesterday. And I commend Dr. Wesley for raising the alarm of the maths results, the pass mark of 36%.
Yes, so I saw you made this post. You said the top line takeaway, and this is, let me just see if I can present this. the top line takeaway. And you all can feel free to join this group, Remark and Raise You CXC Exams Caribbean Coalition for Exam Redress. It's on Facebook. Top line takeaway from the CXC results ceremony today, according to Dr. Wayne Wesley, Registrar of CXC, only 4.9% of the Caribbean, close to 200,000, we have 200,000 annual CSEC candidates, achieve passes in 5 or more CSEC GCSE equivalent subjects when maths and English are included. And yeah, I that startled me as well, because so I was like, wait, is it that just I am so accustomed being in an environment with educators and people who have a lot of subjects? I am not aware that I am in a 5% of the Caribbean environment who have 5 subjects or more, including maths and English. That's incredible. And CXC, there are very few. I think I was speaking to you on the phone pertaining to this. There are very few things in the Caribbean that hold us together as one. One of them is West Indies cricket. Next, and I don't know how good that goes up and down depending on how good West Indies is performing. We have culture, so we have music, carnival, reggae, soca. And one of the common shared experiences in the Caribbean, other than hurricanes, is CXC. So everyone, when I go to different Caribbean countries, people know me a lot because I am the CXC Maths teacher on YouTube, and that's a common shared experience, CXC, CXC. So that has the potential to be like such an extremely beautiful and positive thing for the entire Caribbean. The vision for that should be very high and can be very high. That can be such an impactful thing for the human resource in the Caribbean. And I think that we have gotten accustomed to accepting the bare minimum, like the bare bottom of the bag.
Yeah.
So I'm digressing. This is something that I do all the time. 36% of total candidates pass maths, the pass rate. And that was just the results from this year. But yes, this is the top line you said here.
I would also say I may have to correct that 200,000 number that's in there. Again, I find it so hard to obtain information online or anywhere relating to CXC. It may be only 120,000 children.
Yeah, I think it's 120,000.
But even so, how does that, think of how that translates into the number of hearts, minds, souls, bodies of our children every year. And it was an abysmal pass rate this year, probably because of the flawed maths exam that people sounded the alarm about earlier. But the last 5 years, it hasn't been that great. And it could be the effects of COVID. We do notice again that CXC and their wisdom did not ameliorate their grading, their exam structure, their syllabi, their content to account for the deficiencies that came with COVID. Again, when you compare with other exam bodies globally, they all did. So again, as an international business professional, I have come up in an environment where you rate yourself competitively by comparing yourself to what obtains internationally. And what you said earlier about the grade boundaries and certain information, which is the norm internationally, that candidates have a right to request and obtain. You just don't get it here. The lack in the region, this lack of transparency, one must conclude it's because what are they hiding? If you're confident in your product, I mean, once it does not impact on the integrity of your product that the service that you're delivering, you would give your clients what they ask for 100%. In accordance with industry best practice. We have grown accustomed to accepting it. Why?
So one of the things that is brought on my plate, and one of the questions that I ask, and I'm just going to do 2 more things and we'll end, is how do we effect change? Like, well, because sometimes it feels a little hopeless. And people ask me this, and my answer is that unless there's political pressure, and nothing will change. So unless it becomes like at least speaking from a Trinidadian point of view, unless it's on the election agenda, like then we would see politicians say, well, when I get into power, we'll sort out CXC and we'll make CXC more transparent and we'll put pressure on CXC. And that becomes part of, the manifesto. Then we will maybe be able to see some change. What is your thoughts on that?
Kerwin, let your sister hear, as we would say in Barbados. Initially, because CXC obviously was the obvious target, my advocacy and concern related primarily to CXC service. And I think we have laid out lots of evidence. And if anyone searches my name and CXC, you would see that I have written and made numerous presentations on the issues relating to CXC's products, service delivery, communications. There are deficiencies that need improving. I have changed my perspective and my advocacy over the last year or so to indicate that our CARICOM governments need to be held accountable. And I do agree that if it needs to be an election issue, so be it. I mean, I would say that people have asked me this is many times why I don't have a more political perspective. And I have been reluctant to be political in terms of aligning myself with any particular party, because I don't want my advocacy to be dismissed or entrapped in partisan politics. But if you're not heard, if you're feeling that you're ignored, I would say that our Ministry of Education, particularly the prior Minister of Education, that's now the Deputy Prime Minister, was very receptive to our efforts. And our minister was the only minister regionally at a CARICOM Ministers of Education session promoted external regulation for CXC. So we did gain traction nationally, and regionally we have a Caribbean Coalition for Exam Redress of education stakeholders.
I would say I am extremely apolitical, neutral. I don't, that's one of the things I stay away from because of my forum. But any political party in any country that is supporting any kind of correction and upgrade in our exam body, I would draw attention to that party immediately. So I'm saying that publicly. Any of my social media, any of my clout, my reach, I would push behind that party. Just because I find this issue is such a critical issue, and I think that CXC can be such a powerful thing. One last thing before we go, the SBA, somebody mentioned this, SBA has been an issue. It's also been a problem with teachers, because teachers in some countries in all countries actually feel like they are in some way doing CXC's work by correcting the SBA, and they should be paid because of that. I think they are paid in Barbados, something for something like that. They aren't paid in Trinidad. And I am once again, because of the wide reach I have seen SBAs from right across the region. A lot of SBAs, and the discrepancies, the variation, the quality is very wide. So like what may get 20 out of 20 in one place may not get 20 out of 20 in another place, may get 15 out of 20. And then what we see happening is CXC saying they are remarking, or I forgot the word they are using. They are moderating the SBAs. So and that is very vague in what they mean when they say they are moderating the SBAs. As far as I can see, they are still sampling a couple SBAs. And checking the marks.
Even though they claim they're do 100% moderation.
Right, but I don't think that, because if you're doing 100% moderation, you'll just mark the SBAs and done. Why don't you just mark the SBAs? So they are sampling, and if one SBA, someone said this in the chat, if one SBA from a school isn't marked properly, whether up or down, it can result in the school whole grade dropping down. And I've seen this happen. I've seen it happen numerous times. I would say at least 5 or 6 times, where entire schools have a low SBA mark, and students who are you would guarantee that they will get a 1 end up getting a 3 or 2, and they see a strain C appear in their profile. A strain C appear in their profile. So when you look at it for a while and you hear the different complaints, there are so many things wrong with CXC. There are so many micro problems. And I think the biggest issue that kind of the overarching theme on this is the dismissive nature. The dismissive nature. If CXC was a serious organization, they wouldn't have ignored your 20,000 signed petition and you coming with the whole thing against them. They would. I have never received an official letter, being the biggest YouTube channel, helping, I would say, maybe going up to 1 million students over the years. I have never received official correspondence from CXC. Never, except one time when they tried to stop and take down my YouTube channel in 2019.
What?
Yeah, so other than that, I've never seen official correspondence from CXC. That's just to tell you, CXC doesn't really care about their stakeholders. Teachers aren't holding very high light either in CXC.
Yeah. But Kerwin, I won't say in fairness, to play devil's advocate, your audience, some of them might not be familiar with cable and wireless, because that is an old word now. But we recall monopolies and how monopolies operate. And people don't seem to realize that education is a service, but it's also a business. And a monopoly is going to operate in its best interests, i.e., and if you have a culture that's profit-driven, that doesn't have accountability, that doesn't value care and concern for its stakeholders, its students, its teachers, its parents, they're going to do what is easiest and simplest for them to do. And if the people that they supposedly report to are the entities, i.e. our CARICOM governments, allow them to behave like that, what is the incentive to change? So as far as I'm concerned, I put it right back on the public. Why is it that the public accepts this? Why is it that all these parents come to me and beg me and thank me, sometimes cuss me, even though I'm representing their own children? Why is it that they want me to advocate for their own children when I say there is strength and protection in numbers? Oh, I don't want to come forward because I'm afraid my child will get victimized. You got to buff our own too, because we are too passive. We seem to be happy to accept it, quarrel and grumble, have our children devastated, but then say, oh, well, they'll get over it, they'll grow up. We have to look at ourselves in the mirror and say, the change is only going to happen when we insist to our politicians that there's a need to change. And our politicians are not going to make the change if their constituents don't make them make the change.
Right. All right. Well, I think that's the spot where we end off here. I think it's important that our voices are constantly raised, and these issues are constantly aired in all forums. And as long as I have a YouTube channel, I will always be bringing up this. There may be, if you look at my YouTube channel from 2018, 2019, you will hear I am extremely, by nature, supportive of CXC. Similarly to you, I think that it can be like something really positive for the Caribbean. But after what happened in 2019 and receiving a bunch of letters from things I didn't even know exist, the head of security in the Ministry of Education, and they're trying to remove the channel for basically, so they said I was revealing exam material, which I was not revealing exam material. I have never been a CXC marker, and that's by design. I have been invited many times. I've never been a CXC marker or involved in CXC in that way. So it's a lot. You can. So those of y'all who first time on the channel, you can actually go and look it up. I actually have a video on that. So yeah, that's the only correspondence I ever received, and that was kind of indirect actually. That was through our Ministry of Education, and our Ministry of Education, the officials, when they really checked it out, they dismissed everything. They were like, "This is ridiculous." So they dismissed everything, but it took like a year or so. That was always over my head. So anyhow, I want to thank you for taking the time. This is something that we are always in contact now, so we remain in contact, and I hope to see some change in this. I think one of the ways monopolies are defeated is by introducing competition.
Exactly.
So any Minister of Education that weakens the hold that CXC has on the Caribbean by introducing competition, that will help. The idea is, I don't think CXC on a whole should fall. I prefer if it was remodeled and done better, rather than each country have its individual thing. I think because of the same unity with the curriculum, I prefer if we had one examination body. Also, there's strength in unity. If we have one body that's really well accredited, it's better for the Caribbean as well, rather than we all do different exams that are not native to the Caribbean. Anyhow, so you can talk on this forever because I'm very passionate about this topic, and I know you are as well. But thank you for coming.
Yeah, I will say, just to close, I just want to thank you again. I just want to reiterate, I want CXC to do well. I'm proud of CXC, but to do well, you have to be constructive on areas for improvement, and that is what we're doing. My concern, and you're seeing it happening in increasing numbers, is that we're going to end up with a widening gap between the 1%, the haves and the have-nots. And I know of many friends and also reports, not just in Barbados, but throughout the region, that what people are doing, those with means, they are turning to alternate exam bodies if they're not sending their children away to boarding school, because they have lost confidence in CXC and in the national exam system. And I think that's a tragedy. Nearly 60 years after independence, we're in this position. And we demand and insist that better is done for our children. That's what we're here to do as adults, to protect and ensure that our children maximize their potential. And there's so much room for improvement.
All right. Well, yeah, and I could go on this topic forever. But yeah, so a lot of, in the student hub, we also do SAT exams, and there's a constant rise of people switching over to SAT. And a lot of students are asking about GCSE as well. So people of means who can, they will always find a way. But it's the general population that will suffer. Yeah. All right, so I think I'll end the live stream here. Love and blessings, everybody. Feel free to press like on this stream, and if you are unaware of these issues, you can do some research, and always remember to keep it in mind. One of the things that happens is that you only feel it when it happens to you. So only when you are the one looking at a 3 or a 4 on your paper and you realize, I know I so supposed to get 1, and everybody's calling you crazy. Like, you know, you're trying to trick the system or something. And that's when the injustice happens to you. That is when you actually begin to feel it. And you would be super grateful to have a voice like mine or Miss Paula-Anne talking on your behalf. So even if it hasn't occurred to you and you know it happens to somebody else, it is something that we should keep in the conversation. Love and blessings, everybody.
Thank you.